The room was already charged, the kind of quiet that feels louder than shouting when the late jab finally landed. It wasn't rushed or reckless. It was delivered with a practiced calm, a smile that assumed approval, a tone that suggested this line would close the moment with applause. For a split second, it seemed to work. Heads tilted, cameras leaned in. The confidence behind the words implied safety, dominance, control. But the reaction didn't follow the script. Instead of laughter, there was a pause. Instead of cheers, a ripple of disbelief spread through the space and across screens watching live. The remark hung in the air, exposed and heavier than intended, stripped of its polish the moment it left her mouth. What was meant to sound clever landed as something colder, sharper, and deeply personal. You could feel the shift immediately. Supporters stiffened. Critics leaned forward. The audience at home sensed it too, that unmistakable moment when power overplays its hand. This wasn't just a jab aimed at an individual. It echoed with implications about identity, belonging, and who gets to speak with authority in America. The confidence that accompanied the remark now felt misplaced. Social feeds began lighting up in real time, reactions stacking faster than the words could be walked back. Some froze the clip. Others replayed it. The comment was already escaping the room, traveling far beyond its intended target. What made it explosive wasn't volume or rage, but the assumption behind it, the belief that this kind of line could still pass without consequence, the belief that the person on the receiving end would absorb it quietly. That belief was about to be tested, because across from that confidence sat someone who didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, didn't rush to respond. Calm settled in where offense was expected, and in that stillness, it became clear this moment wasn't ending here. The jab had been thrown, the room had shifted, and the next move would decide everything. Every second stretched, daring the nation to witness whether arrogance would stand uncontested or meet something far stronger today now. This exchange didn't exist in a vacuum. It landed in a country already stretched by arguments over identity, power, and who gets to define what America looks like. That's why the room felt heavier than a normal debate moment. Everyone understood this wasn't about two public figures trading barbs. It was about symbols colliding in real time, with millions watching and choosing sides instinctively. The attention escalated fast. News alerts buzzed. Clips circulated before the sentence had fully settled. Commentators paused their panels to replay the moment again and again, dissecting tone, intent, and consequence. For some viewers, it confirmed long-held frustrations. For others, it triggered a defensive reflex. The divide widened instantly, cutting through timelines, group chats, and living rooms. What raised the stakes even higher was who stood on each side of the exchange. One represented legacy power, insulated by familiarity and privilege, accustomed to shaping the narrative without pushback. The other represented a newer America, one built on participation rather than permission, on earned voice rather than inherited status. That contrast turned a single remark into a referendum on belonging itself. Tension mounted because history hovered over the moment. Similar comments in the past had often gone unanswered or been brushed aside as noise. This time felt different. The audience sensed that silence would not follow. The energy in the room suggested a line had been crossed too clearly to ignore, too publicly to escape. Across the country, people leaned in not out of curiosity, but recognition. Immigrants, children of immigrants, and those who had spent years proving they deserved their seat at the table felt the weight of the jab personally. This wasn't abstract politics. It mirrored conversations they'd lived, rooms they'd sat in, assumptions they'd been forced to absorb quietly. At the same time, supporters of the jab braced themselves, unsure whether the moment would pass or explode. That uncertainty crackled through the air. Every second without a response amplified the suspense. Cameras lingered. Producers held shots longer than usual. Even critics held their breath. Because everyone understood one thing. However the response came, it would redefine the exchange. It would either reinforce old power dynamics or fracture them in front of a national audience. The country stood at the edge of that choice, waiting to see whether this moment would fade into noise or transform into something unforgettable. The sense of inevitability was impossible to ignore. This was no longer about winning a moment, but about shaping the story that would follow. Viewers knew that a carefully chosen response could flip outrage into momentum, turning an insult into an indictment of the mindset behind it. The silence stretched just long enough to make the anticipation almost unbearable. In that pause, expectations recalibrated. People didn't want noise or outrage. They wanted clarity. They wanted to see whether composure could outperform condescension, whether truth could stand taller than provocation. The stage was set not for escalation alone, but for exposure, and as the tension peaked, it became clear that whatever came next would not simply answer the jab. It would change how this entire confrontation would be remembered. What followed would echo far beyond this room, reshaping reputations, alliances, and confidence, leaving no one untouched by the response that was moments away for everyone watching unfold. For years, her public image had been carefully preserved, polished through distance, silence, and selective appearances. She rarely spoke directly, and when she did, it carried the weight of assumed authority. That restraint was often mistaken for grace, interpreted as discipline rather than detachment. Supporters admired the mystique. Critics noted the insulation. She existed above the noise, protected by status, wealth, and the benefit of rarely being challenged face to face in moments that demanded accountability. That insulation created a pattern. When controversies emerged, they were met with dismissal or deflection, rarely engagement. Remarks landed, reactions followed, and then the moment passed without consequence. Over time, this reinforced a sense of untouchability. The expectation was simple: words could be released into the world without real resistance. The echo chamber would soften the impact, and attention would drift elsewhere before scrutiny fully formed. Yet beneath that composed exterior sat contradictions that never fully disappeared. Advocacy framed as elegance often collided with behavior perceived as dismissive. Silence on critical issues was defended as neutrality. Even when neutrality itself became a statement, critics argued that distance from struggle was mistaken for superiority, that privilege was recast as poise. Each moment added another layer to a reputation built more on image than engagement. Her proximity to power magnified everything. Every word carried institutional weight, even when framed casually. What might have passed as a personal opinion from someone else became something heavier coming from her position. That imbalance lingered beneath the surface, unresolved, waiting for a moment when it could no longer be ignored or excused away as misunderstanding or media distortion. The late jab followed that familiar script. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't emotional. It was delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who believed the rules still applied the same way they always had. The assumption was that authority would shield intent, that tone would mask impact. That assumption had gone untested for a long time, and comfort had grown in that safety. But comfort breeds carelessness. The more insulated someone becomes, the more likely they are to underestimate who stands across from them. In this case, the jab revealed more than intended. It exposed a worldview shaped by hierarchy, one that presumed the right to define others while remaining undefined itself. That imbalance was suddenly visible to everyone watching. Past moments resurfaced instantly. Old clips, comments, and silences were re-examined through a new lens. Patterns once dismissed as coincidence began to align. What had been tolerated as aloofness now read as entitlement. What had been framed as restraint now felt like avoidance. The image carefully constructed over years began to fracture under the weight of a single remark. The most dangerous part wasn't the insult itself, but the expectation behind it, the belief that no real consequence would follow. That belief had been reinforced repeatedly over time by systems that rarely demanded reciprocity from those at the top. It created a blind spot, a failure to recognize when the ground had shifted beneath her feet. In moments like these, control often slips quietly before it collapses publicly. The antagonist did not appear rattled at first, because history suggested there was no reason to be. But this time the environment was different. The audience was different. The person on the receiving end was different. The usual protections felt thinner, less reliable. What made the reversal possible was not a sudden change in her behavior, but the accumulation of unresolved tension finally meeting resistance. Years of unchecked authority had created the perfect conditions for overreach, And as the reaction continued to build, it became clear that the image she relied on could no longer absorb the weight of what was coming. This was the moment when confidence began to look like complacency, when status no longer guaranteed safety. Control hadn't been lost yet, but it was slipping, and everyone watching could sense it. The stage was set for a confrontation she was not prepared to navigate. As the story moved toward a response that would expose just how fragile that carefully maintained image truly was, Jasmine Crockett did not arrive in this moment by accident. Her voice was shaped long before cameras turned toward her, forged in spaces where being heard required persistence rather than permission. Long before national attention, she learned how power speaks, how it dismisses, and how it often underestimates those it assumes will stay quiet. That awareness became her foundation, steady and unshakable. Her journey was built through service, not spectacle. Law school classrooms, courtrooms, and community advocacy taught her how language could be both shield and sword. She learned to listen before speaking, to measure impact rather than volume. Each experience reinforced a simple truth: credibility is earned when words are backed by work. That discipline followed her into public life, where preparation mattered more than applause. Crockett's reputation grew from consistency. She showed up informed, composed, and unapologetically present. She spoke with clarity rooted in lived experience, understanding how policy decisions ripple through real lives. For many watching, she represented a reflection of themselves, someone who navigated institutions not designed with her in mind and still refused to be diminished by them. Resilience defined her rise. She faced skepticism, coded criticism, and attempts to reduce her voice to stereotype. Instead of reacting, she responded with substance. Instead of shrinking, she sharpened her arguments. Each challenge strengthened her ability to remain calm under pressure, a skill that would prove essential when the spotlight grew harsher. What set her apart was not just intellect, but intention. Crockett carried herself with an awareness that visibility comes with responsibility. She understood that when she spoke, others felt seen. That knowledge shaped her restraint and her timing. She did not rush to dominate conversations. She waited for moments that mattered, trusting that truth lands harder when delivered with precision. Her public persona reflected that balance: confident without arrogance, direct without cruelty. She challenged narratives while refusing to dehumanize those who opposed her. That composure unsettled critics who expected volatility. It confused those who mistook passion for instability. Crockett offered something different, a model of strength that did not require noise to command attention. Behind that composure was preparation layered over years. She knew the history of debates like this one. She knew how similar moments had unfolded before, often ending with silence or deflection. She had studied how power reacts when confronted calmly, how it exposes itself when pressed gently but persistently. That knowledge lived quietly beneath her stillness. For immigrant communities and those who understood marginalization intimately, her presence carried weight. She spoke with the credibility of someone who knew what it meant to be questioned, underestimated, and scrutinized more harshly than others. Her success did not distance her from those experiences. It sharpened her sense of accountability to them. As the late jab lingered in the air, Crockett did not appear rushed or rattled. Her stillness was not hesitation. It was calculation informed by years of preparation. She understood that this moment required more than rebuttal. It required reframing. The insult was small, but the mindset behind it was not. Everything she had navigated up to this point converged in that pause. The discipline of law, the patience of advocacy, the resilience earned through resistance. This was the kind of moment she had been preparing for without knowing its exact shape. And as the silence stretched, it became clear that when she chose to speak, it would not be impulsive or defensive. It would be deliberate, it would be grounded, and it would carry the weight of every lesson learned along the way. The room sensed it before the words came. The calm across from confidence was not weakness, it was readiness. And in that readiness, the balance of the confrontation began to shift, signaling that the response ahead would not simply answer the jab, but redefine who held power in this exchange. Her understanding of timing was rooted in experience. She had seen how rushed reactions often served the aggressor, how emotional outbursts are used to discredit legitimate points. Crockett refused to offer that convenience. She knew that patience could be disarming, that silence could redirect attention back to the original offense rather than the response. This awareness allowed her to control the rhythm of the moment even before she spoke. There was also a quiet confidence in knowing she belonged in that space. Not granted, not borrowed, but earned. Every credential, every election, every case argued reinforced that truth. She did not need to announce her legitimacy. It existed regardless of who questioned it. That certainty insulated her from the sting of the jab, transforming it into an opportunity rather than an injury. As eyes remained fixed on her, anticipation grew. Viewers could sense that this was not about winning an argument, but about asserting presence without apology. Crockett embodied a version of leadership that did not mirror old power structures, but challenged them by existing differently. And as the moment edged closer to response, it became evident that her words would carry more than rebuttal. They would carry representation, resolve, and a recalibration of respect for everyone watching closely. The moment after the jab did not move forward so much as tighten. The air thickened, reactions colliding in whispers, shifting seats and glances exchanged too quickly to hide. What had been a controlled environment now felt unstable, like a structure tested at its weakest point. The comment lingered, unanswered, stretching tension into something almost physical. Across the room, confidence began to harden into something less certain. Subtle signs surfaced first: a tightened jaw, a posture adjusted one too many times. The assurance that had accompanied the remark started to waver as the silence refused to cooperate. Instead of diffusing the moment, the pause amplified it, forcing everyone to sit with the implications of what had just been said. Meanwhile, the reaction beyond the room escalated in real time. Phones buzzed, screens refreshed. Clips circulated faster than explanations could catch up. Supporters scrambled to reinterpret intent, while critics named the moment plainly. The divide sharpened with every second, each side sensing that this exchange was approaching a point of no return. Jasmine Crockett remained still, not frozen, not withdrawn, but anchored. Her composure became its own statement, a contrast so stark it redirected attention without a word. While agitation flickered on one side, calm expanded on the other. The imbalance unsettled the rhythm of the exchange, disrupting expectations about who would control the next beat. As murmurs grew louder, attempts to regain footing became more obvious. The tone shifted, edges creeping into follow-up remarks as if volume or repetition might reassert dominance. But each effort only highlighted the loss of control. What was meant to feel commanding now felt reactive, driven by the need to close a door that had already swung open. The audience sensed it. This was no longer a balanced back and forth. It was a study in contrast, unfolding live. One side revealing strain under scrutiny, the other absorbing pressure without visible effect. That contrast sharpened the stakes, transforming tension into anticipation. Cameras lingered longer on faces. Producers held shots, aware that something pivotal was building beneath the surface. Even seasoned commentators hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt or allow the silence to stretch further. The discomfort had become part of the story, impossible to ignore or smooth over. With every passing moment, the jab lost its initial power and gained something else entirely. It became a liability, a line that demanded resolution. The escalation was no longer about louder voices, but about who could withstand the weight of the moment without unraveling. Crockett's stillness continued to command attention. It reframed the exchange from confrontation to exposure. The agitation opposite her now read as insecurity, each movement betraying an awareness that the room was no longer aligned as expected. Authority, once assumed, was being questioned without a single word spoken. In that suspended moment, expectations recalibrated once more. This was no longer about damage control or optics, but about reckoning. The escalation had stripped away performance and left only substance. Viewers recognized the turning point instinctively, sensing that the next words would echo far beyond this setting. The discomfort had done its work, exposing fault lines that could not be smoothed over. As the pause deepened, anticipation sharpened into certainty. A response was coming, not rushed, not reactive, but precise. And when it arrived, It would arrive with clarity powerful enough to shift momentum completely, leaving no doubt about who truly held command of the narrative. All eyes stayed fixed, bracing for impact as history edged forward. Jasmine Crockett finally spoke, and the shift was immediate. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't rush. Her response began slowly, deliberately, as if inviting the room to lean in rather than recoil. The calm in her tone cut through the tension more sharply than anger ever could. It signaled control, not just of her words, but of the entire moment. She acknowledged the remark without repeating it, refusing to amplify the insult itself. Instead, she reframed it, exposing the assumption underneath with surgical precision. Her words were measured, each sentence landing cleanly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The effect was disarming. What had been framed as confidence now faced clarity. As she spoke, the room adjusted. Postures straightened, faces tightened. The audience sensed the momentum shifting in real time. Crockett wasn't reacting emotionally. She was explaining, contextualizing, and, most importantly, reclaiming the narrative. She spoke not just for herself, but for everyone who recognized the implication behind the jab. She reminded the room, calmly, that dignity is not granted by status or lineage. It is demonstrated through service, accountability, and respect. Her voice remained steady as she drew a line between inherited power and earned authority. The contrast was unmistakable, and it landed harder because it was delivered without hostility. The response unfolded in layers. First came composure, then clarity, then consequence. She highlighted how remarks, like that one, don't exist as isolated moments, but as reflections of broader attitudes that shape policy, opportunity, and belonging. Each point built on the last, creating a rhythm that pulled the audience forward. You could feel the discomfort shift direction. The confidence that had opened the exchange now appeared brittle. Attempts to interrupt faded quickly, overshadowed by the weight of her argument. Crockett maintained eye contact, unflinching, grounded in facts and lived truth. Silence followed her sentences, not because she demanded it, but because the room needed it. As reactions rippled outward, viewers at home recognized the significance. This wasn't a clapback built on insults. It was a recalibration. She spoke about contribution over ancestry, commitment over image, and responsibility over rhetoric. With each line, the original jab shrank further, exposed as shallow in contrast. Her pacing slowed intentionally at key moments, allowing words to settle. She paused just long enough for meaning to sink in, then continued, guiding the audience toward an unavoidable conclusion. The power of her response lay in its inevitability. Once heard, it could not be dismissed or undone. Across the room, composure cracked. What had once felt like authority now struggled to regain footing. The shift was visible, unmistakable. Crockett didn't need to point it out. The contrast spoke for itself. Calm had overtaken confidence. Substance had overtaken status. She closed by reframing the entire exchange, lifting it beyond personal grievance. This was about respect in public discourse, about recognizing the humanity in those who serve, and about understanding that America's strength has always come from participation, not exclusion. Her final words landed softly but firmly, like a door closing on outdated assumptions. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was heavy with recognition. The room understood that something irreversible had occurred. The jab had been answered, not with equal force, but with undeniable truth. Momentum had shifted, and there was no returning to where the exchange had begun. As Crockett finished, reactions continued to ripple outward. Faster now, sharper, filled with clarity. The balance of power had been redefined in plain sight. What began as an attempt to diminish had instead elevated, and as the weight of her words settled, it became clear that this moment would not fade quietly. It would travel, resonate, and reshape the conversation long after the room itself fell silent. In that aftermath of soundless impact, attention locked onto her with a different intensity. Not anticipation this time, but acknowledgement. She had taken control without spectacle, without cruelty, and that restraint amplified everything she had said. The response felt complete, yet its implications were still unfolding, stretching beyond the walls that had contained the exchange. She had done something rare in moments like this. She refused to personalize the attack while still holding it accountable. By doing so, she denied the antagonist the refuge of victimhood or misinterpretation. There was no outrage to deflect, no tone to criticize. Only substance remained, standing exposed and undeniable. The audience reacted not with noise, but with recognition. Heads nodded slowly. Screens at home paused and replayed the moment, not to absorb. Her words carried a clarity that cut through spin before it could form. This wasn't a viral soundbite engineered for outrage. It was a statement built to last. As her response echoed outward, its effectiveness became even clearer. The confidence that once dominated the exchange now seemed out of place, misaligned with the room's recalibrated energy. What had been intended as a show of control now read as overreach, undone by a response that never raised its temperature. Crockett's calm became the headline. Commentators struggled to compress the moment into easy framing because it resisted distortion. It was neither explosive nor chaotic. It was disciplined, thoughtful, and unsettling to those accustomed to power going unchallenged. She had spoken with the assurance of someone who knew the facts, the history, and the audience. There was no appeal for approval, no glance toward allies for reinforcement. Her confidence came from preparation, not performance. That distinction resonated instantly with viewers who understood the difference. The antagonist's posture betrayed the shift even without words. What followed was no longer engagement, but retreat disguised as composure. The original certainty could not be recovered, because the terms of the exchange had changed. The room was no longer playing by assumed hierarchies. It was responding to credibility. Crockett allowed the moment to breathe, never rushing to fill the silence she had created. That restraint signaled finality. The response didn't need elaboration or reinforcement. It stood on its own, complete and immovable. Attempts to pivot away felt transparent, almost futile. The significance of the counterattack became clear in how quickly it reframed public perception. This was not about a clever line or verbal dominance. It was about exposure. She had revealed the fragility beneath assumed authority and done so without diminishing herself in the process truly. The reaction was instant. The moment the clip hit social feeds, timelines erupted. Short videos looped endlessly, captions multiplied, and the silence that followed Jasmine Crockett's response became the loudest sound online. What happened in that room no longer belonged to the people inside it. It had escaped, racing outward faster than spin or damage control could catch it. Hashtags began trending within minutes. Supporters clipped her calm delivery, isolating key lines that reframed the exchange. Comment sections filled with praise, disbelief, and recognition. People shared their own stories, moments when they had been underestimated or spoken over, drawing strength from the composure they had just witnessed. The response wasn't just admired, it was felt. Pundits scrambled to respond. Panels paused mid-discussion to replay the moment, dissecting tone, pacing, and impact. Some rushed to soften the implications. Others acknowledged the clarity of the response. Attempts to minimize it faltered as audiences rejected false equivalents. The clip kept spreading, untouched by commentary, proving that authenticity travels farther than explanation. Supporters celebrated not just the words, but the way they were delivered. Calm became the headline. Memes contrasted composure with agitation, elevating restraint into strength. For many, the moment felt validating, a reminder that dignity could still command attention without compromise. Screens filled with messages of gratitude, calling the response empowering and overdue. Critics reacted differently. Some retreated into silence, others shifted topics entirely. A few attempted to reframe the exchange, but the visual record resisted revision. The discomfort was visible, preserved in replayed footage and screenshots. Each attempt to downplay the moment only amplified it further. By evening, the exchange dominated conversations beyond politics. It appeared in cultural discussions, classrooms, and workplaces. People referenced it as shorthand for standing one's ground with grace. The response had become a case study, not in rhetoric alone, but in presence. Influencers and public figures weighed in, sharing the clip with captions praising restraint and preparation. Each share widened the ripple, reinforcing that this was more than a viral moment. It was a signal that the audience was paying attention and responding accordingly. What began as a late jab had transformed into a national conversation. The antagonist's confidence faded with every replay, while Crockett's credibility grew. The exchange was no longer frozen in time. It was alive, reshaping perceptions with each view. As night continued, one truth settled across the discourse. This moment could not be contained or undone. It had shifted expectations, elevated standards, and reminded viewers that when power is met with clarity, the impact travels far beyond the room where it began. That realization fueled ongoing discussion, with viewers returning to the clip repeatedly, finding new meaning in pauses, emphasis, and restraint. Educators referenced it when discussing discourse, advocates shared it during organizing efforts, and families talked about it around dinner tables. The moment became a reference point, shorthand for what accountability can look like when delivered without cruelty. Even those who disagreed with her politics acknowledged the effectiveness of the response. The conversation shifted from whether the jab was appropriate to why the response resonated so deeply. That shift marked the true aftershock, moving debate away from provocation and towards substance. By morning, headlines reflected the reversal. Coverage centered on composure, credibility, and command. The original insult felt distant, overshadowed by the clarity that followed. What lingered was not outrage, but recognition. The exchange had changed the tone of the conversation, setting a new bar for how power could be challenged publicly. The shockwaves continued to expand, carried by people who saw themselves reflected in that moment. It was no longer just news. It was a reminder that preparation, patience, and clarity could still cut through noise. As the conversation kept moving, one thing remained clear. This moment had not ended. It had begun something larger, and its impact was still unfolding across the country, reshaping expectations with every retelling and reaffirming that dignity can travel faster than disrespect ever could, and a nation ready to listen again when truth speaks plainly and refuses to back down from its place in the public square today. Together, watching, remembering, and learning from what happens when composure meets challenge and emerges unmistakably victorious for everyone paying attention. This moment ultimately became larger than the individuals involved. What unfolded was not just a response to a jab, but a demonstration of how power can be confronted without becoming what it challenges. The confrontation resolved itself not through dominance but through dignity, offering a lesson that reached far beyond the room and into the national conscience. At its core, the exchange revealed a simple truth. Insults seek to shrink, but restraint expands. When provocation is met with composure, it exposes the weakness behind the attack. Jasmine Crockett's response showed that strength does not require volume or cruelty. It requires clarity, self-respect, and the courage to remain grounded when pressure invites reaction. Respect emerged as the defining contrast. One approach relied on assumption and hierarchy, expecting deference without accountability. The other relied on earned authority, rooted in preparation and purpose. That contrast reframed the confrontation entirely. Viewers saw that dignity is not passive. It is active, deliberate, and powerful when exercised with intention. The resolution resonated because it reflected values many hold quietly but rarely see modeled publicly. It affirmed that truth does not need theatrics to be effective. It reminded audiences that calm can be commanding, and that integrity holds weight even when challenged by status or tradition. And a moment designed to diminish restraint elevated the conversation instead. Strength under pressure became the lasting image. Crockett did not trade insults or seek to embarrass. She held the line of respect while refusing to surrender her voice. That balance struck a chord with those who have navigated similar moments in their own lives, where responding with grace felt harder but proved more meaningful. Beyond politics, the lesson settled into something universal. Dignity is not granted by those in power. It is claimed by those who know their worth. Respect is not demanded through intimidation, but earned through consistency and accountability. The exchange illustrated that when truth is spoken calmly, it leaves little room for dismissal. This resolution mattered because it modeled a different kind of leadership, one that does not mirror arrogance to defeat it, but renders it ineffective by refusing to engage on its terms. That choice reshaped the narrative, turning a moment of provocation into a moment of affirmation for millions watching. The uplifting power of the moment came from its accessibility. Anyone could see themselves in that response. Anyone who has been underestimated, spoken over, or reduced to assumption recognized the quiet victory it represented. It was not about winning an argument, but about standing firmly without apology. As the dust settled, what remained was not bitterness or division, but clarity. The exchange reaffirmed that values still matter, that character still registers, and that dignity remains a force capable of cutting through noise. In a climate often driven by outrage, this moment offered an alternative path forward. The resolution did not erase disagreement, but it elevated discourse. It reminded the audience that respect and truth can coexist with firmness, and that composure can shift outcomes more effectively than confrontation alone. That realization lingered, leaving viewers with a sense of possibility. In the end, the lesson was unmistakable. When restraint meets provocation, and truth meets arrogance, dignity prevails. The moment closed not with dominance, but with resolve, reinforcing a shared belief that character still defines leadership, and that America is strongest when its values are lived out loud, even under pressure. That message lingered as a quiet encouragement, urging audiences to carry this standard forward, to speak with purpose, listen with care, and believe that principled strength still shapes outcomes when it is practiced consistently every day. Moments like this are why the story mattered. What began as a late jab meant to assert control instead revealed something far more powerful when it backfired in plain sight. The epic clapback was not about humiliation, but about clarity, showing how dignity can flip a narrative and expose the limits of arrogance. This is why the exchange continues to resonate. It reminds us that words carry weight, and how we respond defines who we are. When truth is delivered calmly, it travels further than any insult ever could. When respect is modeled publicly, it gives others permission to demand it in their own lives. If this moment struck a chord with you, take a second to sit with why. Think about the times you have witnessed power overreach or felt pressure to stay silent. This story is not just about one exchange. It is about choosing composure over reaction and purpose over provocation. Share this story with people who believe accountability still matters. Pass it along to those who value respect, preparation, and courage under pressure. Join the conversation, not with outrage, but with intention. By engaging, you become part of something larger than a viral moment, reinforcing a standard where dignity leads, truth holds ground, and voices earned through service are heard nationwide by millions watching closely today.